Welcome, and thanks for joining us as we spotlight Holy Cross alumni who have answered the call to become members of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. I'm Father Keith Maskowitz, Assistant Chaplain for Liturgy, Chaplain for the first year class of 2024. Today, I'm joined by my novitiate classmate, my good friend, Tim O'Brien, an alumnus of the Holy Cross class of 2006, and he was class valedictorian. And he would hate that I'm reminding people of that. We're taking advantage of Zoom to come to you today. Tim is a current member of the Jesuit community at Loyola University in Baltimore, Maryland, and is in the midst of pursuing a Ph.D. in history at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. He has already earned master's degrees from both Loyola University Chicago and the University of Chicago. And prior to his current PhD studies, Tim spent time in France, where he studied theology, worked for the Jesuit Refugee Service, and offered spiritual direction. And he's certainly been busy, that's true. Tim, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Great to see you.
Likewise. Happy New Year.
Oh, and with your spirit, yes, Happy New Year. Tim, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about being a student in pandemic. You know, we've certainly have the undergrad experience here, but I know you're a good friend of mine, and I know that you've been doing TAing there at Hopkins. And what's it been like being a student in pandemic and being a student at Hopkins in the PhD program?
Yeah, it's I think for everybody, it's been a really strange time. The common refrain is like, we just can't wait for this to be over. And I know everybody feels that way. It's been, on the one hand, so teaching undergrads at this point has been really interesting because I see it both as a student myself and I watch my students kind of going through this. I think what we're realizing is the tremendous amount of learning that happens when you're in person. That's not just the result of processing knowledge or reading text, but the give and take with people in real time and real space. And I think we'll be much more grateful to be back at that when we eventually get back to that kind of way of learning. You know, for a graduate student whose work, especially at this point in my program, is mostly reading and reading a lot full time. It doesn't change terribly much, but it changes the ability, how to put it, the outlets, right? So the decompression times have shifted because you still have to stay basically at home. So that's been, part of the experience of being a student in the pandemic. I think, more and more I'm reflecting, especially during the break, not just on, I can't wait until this is over, but being a student in the pandemic, but also trying to learn from the pandemic and learn from the experience that we're having. Because I think it's very easy, especially for me, but for a lot of us to say like, I just can't wait for this to be over. And I think that times of trial like this can be very clarifying for us. And so I would like to come out of the pandemic being a little bit more wise and not just having it be over, whether that's just kind of knowing more about, myself, what my desires are, what my frustrations are. And I think being forced to really have a lot of time to look inward is kind of what we're fleeing when we say, I just can't wait for this to be over. We all are hopeful for that, hopeful for the disease too to be at an end. But I'm hoping also to be a student in the pandemic and kind of it, let it be my teacher in some way.
Yeah, I just got off a call with our social media team here in the chaplain's office, and we're going to ask the chaplains and then the wider community, what was the grace of 2020 for you? It's such an important question, but not an easy question, certainly.
No, it's very hard. And, all the memes are hilarious about 2020. I personally am in a deep, deep rabbit hole of dog memes and reels on Instagram. And so like one of the best is things that a Chihuahua didn't appreciate about 2020. And though I laugh every time I watch it a lot, I also want to pay attention to like what I did appreciate about 2020, because it was a year of my life that I can't have back.
Right.
So.
And we firmly believe like God was in it somehow, somewhere.
Yes.
So we need to be clear about naming that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tim, I know your family. I know you're from King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, just outside Philadelphia, and in some ways proudly so.
The Regal City.
I also know that you come from a big Villanova family.
Mm-hmm.
How did you choose Holy Cross? How to get on your radar? Why Holy Cross and not not Villanova?
No need to be specific. My family may watch this. Um, I so I went to Catholic school my whole life, from parochial school through, well, through the first round of grad school, and I think Holy Cross I found by accident. My father had a colleague who went to Holy Cross and was, as we tend to be, a fairly obnoxious fan of Holy Cross in all of its respects. And so when it came time to visit colleges, it was on my radar primarily because I kind of wanted to go away from the Philadelphia area for college. And I also, I do better in smaller learning environments. And I knew I wanted to study government political science. So those were really the criteria that I had. I didn't need a big university. I didn't want to be, ironically, given where I am now, in a major research environment. I wanted to be at a place where the give and take of ideas and exchange was happening on very small, intimate in some sense. So I went and visited. I went for the interview. I love that there was an interview. I know that most people probably wouldn't say that, but it was very good for me. And I kind of walked out with the feeling that's where I was going to be for the next 4 years of my life, and thankfully so.
What professors in political science do you remember have fond memories of?
Yeah, I was really close with Karen Dubnoff was my advisor. I knew the department well, but we used to joke. She's now retired. She's a emerita, but she used to joke that I had a minor in Dubnoff studies because so many of the courses that I took were really about the judiciary, which was her area of expertise. And I had every intention arriving at Mount St. James of becoming an attorney. I had kind of a 75% intention of becoming an attorney once I graduated from Holy Cross, when I did. And obviously, as you know, and others as well, that did not happen. This happened instead, which, thank God.
Yeah. I know, many of our students study abroad programs they've all been canceled. And this semester, from what I understand, there are maybe 4 that are being allowed. But one of the ones that was even permitted last spring was the Washington semester program, which you yourself had also done. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? Where did you have an internship, and maybe what was its influence on you about staying in DC after you graduated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I worked. Well, first of all, I did both. Not through Holy Cross. My Villanova connection followed me abroad. I went abroad for a summer through Villanova because I had a concentration in Latin American studies, and so I went to Chile with them for the summer, and then because I really wanted to do the DC semester. I worked at the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was a terrific experience. I was, opening mail and doing intern things and doing research is a major part of that program at the Library of Congress. And it was a tremendous experience intellectually and kind of personally. I was very interested in politics, as many of the people who go are. And I would say that, you asked the question about, I returned to DC after graduation from Holy Cross, where I worked at the Department of Justice. And I think that my time in the Washington program was actually very clarifying for me in terms of my relationship to politics in this country. I would make a distinction between politics and governing. And I think that both, they're obviously intimately intertwined, as we now know. If politics are dysfunctional, government struggles. But they're not exactly the same thing. And I realized working in politics that I was much more interested in working in government, and did that for a few years before I entered the society. So yeah, it was an important personal time also, just in terms of thinking about life, the coming life after Holy Cross. And I'm really grateful to have had that, and also the opportunity to have gone abroad. I learned a lot more than just Spanish in Chile too. So.
Yes. If any of our viewers catch Tim on the street, you should ask him one story about a chance encounter with the U.S. Attorney General when you were working at the State Department. I don't think we have time for that whole story.
Probably don't have time. Also, he's been retired now for something like over a decade. So
yeah, it's a good story, certainly.
It's a great story.
But another good story, I would say, is your story. about your vocation and how you came to the Jesuits. And you said you went to Catholic school, Our Lady of Divine Providence, I think it was, or something like that.
Mother Divine Providence.
Mother Divine Providence. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that kind of journey. When did you first feel a calling to the priesthood? Why the Jesuits? Why not the strong pull to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, which is a very strong institution? Yeah.
Yeah. So I first thought about being a priest when I was an altar boy, so like 4th, 5th grade, and that ran aground towards the latter end of junior high and in high school, definitely. Why the Jesuits is a simple question. It's because of Holy Cross, and I always say this because it's true. My vocation is so deeply tied to the retreat program at Holy Cross, and to, in particular, the 5-day version of the spiritual exercises. So my faith life, reflection on faith and everything, came into greater clarity at Holy Cross, and to engage intellectually with what I believed and with what we believe, but also the kind of practice and lived element of spirituality and a relationship with God. And so it was out of that, and out of that program and emphasis, and working with the chaplain's office, and especially the retreat program, that this kind of vocation question grew in me. And I always like to say too that it was nourished by people who were not just Jesuits and not just chaplains. I mentioned before Karen Dubnoff, who is a person of great faith herself, and she wasn't teaching me theology; she was teaching me political science. But there was a way in which our conversations would be about something bigger, and about questions of meaning and personal significance in life and vocation. Hers as a teacher and as a mother, and my growing Jesuit vocation at that point, which I was in the very beginning stages of discerning at that point. So, yeah.
Who else is part of that story? You mentioned other people kind of not forcing your hand, but guiding you.
Gee, Keith, have you heard this story before? Significant players in my Jesuit vocation include the late Kim McElhaney, the late Jody Ziegler, professor of visual art history, and Alice Laffey, now retired from religious studies, who is a very memorable figure at various points in my journey toward the Jesuits, mostly because she gives the unvarnished truth at all times, including when I was trying to deceive myself about not wanting to be a Jesuit. So and it's very significant to me that I just listed off 4 women, and not all Catholics, but people who, as part of their mission as educators and part of their mission as good human beings, were attentive to helping to educate, to lead out from me, not just interesting thoughts, but an interesting way of being in the world that is true to who I am.
Who directed you on the 5-day retreat?
Well, I went twice. I was a 2-time offender. So the first time was Father Bill Campbell, so class of 86, 88. Sorry, Bill, if I got that wrong. And the second time was Father Vadaklis, who I think it's class of 71. Both very important Jesuit figures in my life, both at Holy Cross and subsequently. So, yeah.
That's great. Our generation sometimes talks about having Jesuit heroes. And I wonder, when I first did one of these interviews with Father Hayes, I said to him, "You're one of my heroes, Jim." Especially I was thinking at that time, just about a year ago, he had flown to Florida after the tragic accident with the rowing team. And, Jim is excellent in those moments, and he has a skill there that I don't think that I have, frankly. And I wonder, are there people like that for you in your life? Who have been some of your Jesuit heroes throughout the years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I hesitate to name anyone because you don't want to offend anyone by leaving them off the list. So there's definitely a temptation to name people who are dead. But so in that connection, one of the kindest Jesuits I ever met was after my time at Holy Cross, was a man named Leo Murray, who was the associate pastor and then senior priest at Holy Trinity Church in Washington, D.C., where I was a parishioner, and actually then subsequently I had his job for a year. as a new priest, I'm still kind of a new priest, but as a younger priest, and just a gentleness and a spiritual wisdom to him, and a kindness that seems like not heroic virtue. It doesn't seem like hero qualities, but he was a man who knew God and knew how to convey that to people in his preaching and in his way of moving about in this world. I mean, I think too of some of the greats, right? So people you and I know, Paul Harmon, who was at Holy Cross, not when I was a student, but who I got to know subsequently, just a gentle and wise man. I've had the pleasure recently of working with John O'Malley, longtime professor at Weston School of Theology and then at Georgetown University, kind of a great Jesuit historian, but also fundamentally just a very solid man and a good role model of what this life can look like, especially as a scholar. So those are some of the people who kind of spring to mind. I would also harken back to my answer for some of the people who were influential in my vocation story who are not Jesuits. As more as role models of how to live a vocation in a lot of different ways.
As your senior and in life and in religion, I am shocked that you didn't mention me, but you know.
Well, you are older than me, and always have been, and increasingly are. So.
Increasingly, yes.
Yes.
You lived in lots of places in your Jesuit life: DC, Chicago, Scranton, Paris. Now you're in Baltimore for the second round. Is that hard to move around so much? And what's your favorite part about kind of having lived all over the place, and what's the most difficult part?
There is I think it was harder when I was younger to move. I basically have averaged a zip code change every 2 years, and in some instances have moved every year for the last 5 years. I think this is the first time that I'm in the same house for 2 consecutive years since the last time I was in Baltimore. So it is a challenge. It encourages a certain freedom with possessions and a willingness to get rid of things, especially books. But I think that, you know, the shadow side of moving, which is sometimes feeling that home is an elusive concept and feeling kind of rootless, is also part of the gift of our life. And that you mentioned all of those places where I have been and studied or served as a priest or as a scholastic. And, you know, the gift of the life comes with the challenge of moving, which is that you are given the opportunity to be in people's lives and have your own life, your own intellectual journey, your own spiritual journey, enriched tremendously by encounter with different places, with different cultures, with different viewpoints. So that the gift comes with the challenge, and I wouldn't trade it. Though I would really like to be in one place for maybe like 2 or 3 years. That would be nice.
That would be a shift, certainly. Yes.
Yes.
We spoke a little bit about this at the beginning, but maybe a final question here is, you know, this has been a very difficult, almost a year now. The coronavirus has been in the United States just about a year. And I wonder, like, how are you finding hope? You know, we talked a little bit about like naming the grace of this past year, but even as we look forward to the next several months, which we're still not quite out of the woods, the vaccine is here, but slowly being utilized. I wonder if you can say, like, where are you finding hope in these times?
It's a great question, and it's mostly a great question for reminding me to look. I also think, like, I love the way we talk about finding hope as if it's hiding under a rock somewhere, or like somewhere else than where we are. And I think that for me is the challenge right now. It's not so much to like find it hidden in a drawer somewhere and like pull it out and wring it out and get as much of it as I can, but to really look intently at the very small realities. Our world has gotten at once much bigger because we're now Zooming with people all around the world all day long, whether we like it or not. It's also gotten a lot more tighter. The frame has tightened. And I think that the place that I find hope are the places that I find joy and gratitude. So the ways in which this experience, painful, difficult, has summoned out for me and I think also for the life of my community, some real grace, and some real new depth. You know, when I was talking before about how will I come out of this experience a little bit wiser, I think some of that is a deeper reality of what matters. You know, the people, the relationships, the undertakings that are really meaningful for me and which give me life, and that is where hope is to be found, which is also where God is to be found, and that's where I want to be found.
Yes.
So yeah.
I heard over the summer there was a few weddings down in the chapel, and they were all very small and all very controlled. But one of them was celebrated by Bill Reiser, and his homily was about vows, taking vows to one another in front of the community of God, as it's a promise of the future, and it's all hope. You know, vows are future-oriented activities, which I thought was such a beautiful reflection, because the hope is always down the line. You know, it's always kind of on the horizon.
Yes.
And much in the past year has tried to kind of rob us of the horizon, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, thanks so much for spending time with me today, giving our alumni and friends a glimpse of what it's like to be a Jesuit, even a young Jesuit. Imagine that. The extended Holy Cross community is a better place for you in it, and I am, of course, grateful for your friendship these past many years.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Cross.
To our viewers, keep an eye out for our next Jesuit alumnus profile in the coming weeks. And until then, be well.